Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church. Well, it's a Friday. I hope you've had a really good day. I hope that you've had a great week. You've seen God at work. You're expecting even more in the future. Sometimes things don't work out the way we anticipate or want. And sometimes we get frustrated. I do. I know you must too. When you'll ask God for something and it seems like it's forever before you get an answer. And if you've ever found yourself in one of these spots, I have a verse to share with you this morning. It comes from 2 Peter, the third chapter, and verses 8 and 9. Reads this way. But you must not forget this one thing, dear friends. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. The Lord isn't really being slow about his promises, as some people think. No, he's being patient for your sake. Well, let's think about that for a minute. When you and I have a problem or a concern, all we really know is this moment. Now, we can think about the past, but we can't see into the future. We have no idea what the next day is going to look like. Oh, we assume all kinds of stuff, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And when something bad happens, almost always, not always, but almost, people think the worst. So if somebody gets a diagnosis of some kind of a disease, most people think immediately, oh, that's going to be awful. And even some of the most horrible diagnoses wind up turning out pretty good. In fact, from a medical standpoint, most cancers end up with a good outcome. Now, not all, that's for sure. But as soon as people hear the word cancer, they immediately, in their minds, rush off to the worst case scenario. And then when they want an answer, they want it right now. Because obviously, I don't want to go to that terrible outcome. But God doesn't look at it that way. He's got a much bigger perspective. Yep. He sees today in light of tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next 5 years, next 10 years, next 20 years, and so on. He sees all of that. And he knows in his wisdom what's really best for you and for me. And what we want at this moment may turn out to be the very worst thing that could ever happen to us. But we don't know that because all we see is the right this moment. Now, I'm not suggesting that there are problems that don't have terrible outcomes, because there are. Somebody loses their job and the plant closes and the town's drying up. I mean, that's terrible. And in order to keep food on the table for their family, they may have to take some drastic actions. But God's in charge of all of that. And Peter says here, a day is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years is like a day. Well, if we could understand when we pray, when we have difficulties, that God answers our prayers, He really does. But we may not see the answer right away. And it goes on here to say, the Lord really isn't being slow about answering, as some people think. No, He's being patient for your sake. I look back in my life and I see some things that darn near killed me, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And at the time, that's all I could see was the pain and the fear. I knew there was a God who cared for me, and I prayed, but I didn't see much happening. I knew eventually I'd see something happening, but it's that time in between that's really tough. And that's where you just have to rest on your faith. And faith you can't see. It's something that has to come from within, that comes from a relationship with God that knows that God cares about us. And I can say in every instance, looking back, each one of those terrible moments brought great joy down the road and gave me an opportunity to realize if God could do that and that and that, then maybe in the future he can do this and this and this. See, we sort of build up our faith based on our experiences of the past. Now, if you're one of those who demands an immediate answer, well, you got a problem because you can't rush God. I remember I had a lady in my church, a young lady who had cancer and they couldn't find it. And about 10 months went by. And during that time, her brother came to me and said, now, if God heals her, I'll come to church. Well, God didn't take away her cancer, and she died. And her brother came to me and said, I told you that if God healed her, I'd come to church. But he didn't, so I'm not coming. Well, I couldn't talk him out of it. There are no words to argue a situation like that. But I kept thinking how much better it would have been if he'd have said, I'm going to come to church and learn about God and let him take care of the future. How much better his life probably would have been. How much better his life, at least during the time of his sister's cancer, would have been. And I saw God do some great things in that lady's life and in her family, even though she eventually died of the cancer. You see, God sees more than we see. You know, it sounds kind of goofy, but he knows more than we do. He really does. And because of that, his answers to our prayers are based on not rush, not the immediacy, but the long term. How does the passage say it here? He's being patient for your sake, not his. He doesn't need to be patient. He's not bothered by time. You and I are. But he's answering our prayers in a way that really is best for you and for me. Whether we understand that or not, that's a whole different ballgame. But when we pray, we can know, we can trust, we can bank on, we can count on, we can know for sure that God's going to answer. And he's going to answer in a way that's best for you and for me. Well, I hope you'll think about that today and this weekend. I hope you look for God in all of the aspects of your life. And when a need comes, tell him. If you hear of someone else who has a need, go to him and ask him and talk to him. He'll listen for your sake, not his. Well, thanks for listening. God bless you. I hope you have a great, 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 great weekend. And I'll talk to you again.